The biting wind of late autumn 1877 whipped through Willow Creek, carrying with it the crisp scent of pine and the distant mournful cry of a train. Elias Thorne pulled his worn wool coat tighter, his breath misting in the frigid air as he disembarked from the dusty carriage. The journey from Boston had been long and arduous, each mile bringing him further from the familiar hustle of city life and deeper into the unsettling quiet of rural Massachusetts. He was a man of logic, a pragmatic journalist seeking a quiet refuge after a particularly brutal assignment, yet a pervasive sense of unease had settled upon him the moment he'd seen the weathered sign. Willow Creek, population 317. His destination, the ancestral home of the Blackwood family, stood silhouetted against the fading twilight on a hill overlooking the small town. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion, its once grand facade now showing the wear of decades of neglect. Dark, empty windows stared out like vacant eyes, and the skeletal branches of ancient oak trees clawed at the slate roof. Elias had inherited the property from a distant, almost forgotten aunt, a reclusive woman whose letters had always been filled with vague, unsettling pronouncements about the house. He dismissed them as the ramblings of old age, but standing before the looming structure, a shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down his spine. The carriage driver, a stoic man named Thomas, helped Elias unload his meager luggage. "Quite a place you've got yourself, Mr. Thorne," Thomas offered, his voice flat. "Heard tell it's been empty for nigh on 20 years. Since the Blackwood twins." He trailed off, his gaze darting nervously towards the house. Elias raised an eyebrow. "The twins?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Aye, the Blackwood twins, Mary and Martha. Vanished without a trace, they did. Just shy of their 7th birthday. Folks said the family. Well, they said the twins were just a phase, a childish fancy, and they'd outgrow whatever it was that kept them hidden. But no one ever saw them again. The Blackwoods left soon after, never looked back. The house just stood." A knot tightened in Elias's stomach. He'd heard no mention of missing children in his aunt's letters, only cryptic warnings about the house's peculiar silence. He tried to dismiss it as local folklore, the kind of exaggerated tales spun in isolated communities. As Thomas drove away, leaving Elias alone in the growing darkness, the wind picked up, rustling through the overgrown bushes that choked the pathway. The front door, a heavy dark oak, creaked open with a groan as Elias pushed it. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something else. Something indefinable yet distinctly unsettling. Moonlight, filtering through grimy windows, cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters on the walls. He fumbled for his lantern, its flickering light revealing a grand but neglected entrance hall. Cobwebs draped from the chandeliers like tattered shrouds, and the once vibrant wallpaper peeled in curling strips. A chill permeated the air, colder than the outside, and Elias found himself pulling his coat even tighter. He knew the house was old, but there was an oppressive quality to its silence, a feeling that it held secrets within its very foundations. As he explored the lower floor, each creak of the floorboards echoed in the stillness, amplifying the unsettling atmosphere. The parlor, with its shrouded furniture, felt as though it held invisible occupants. The dining room, long table covered with a thick layer of dust, seemed to hum with unspoken conversations. Elias tried to rationalize the feeling, attributing it to exhaustion and the natural eeriness of an abandoned house. He finally ascended the grand, sweeping staircase, its banister smooth beneath his gloved hand. On the second floor, the air grew even colder. As he approached what he presumed to be the master bedroom, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. It was a rhythmic, gentle whisper, like two small voices murmuring just beyond the threshold of hearing. He stopped dead, straining to listen. The sound seemed to drift from the room directly across from him, what must have been the children's nursery. Elias, a seasoned journalist who had faced down riots and exposed corruption, felt a prickle of unease. He told himself it was the wind, perhaps the settling of the old house. But the whispers persisted, faint yet distinct, like a lullaby sung by unseen lips. He took a hesitant step towards the nursery door, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The whispers seemed to grow clearer, almost forming words, though he couldn't quite discern them. He reached for the doorknob, his fingers brushing against the cold brass, a sense of dread coiling in his gut. Before he could turn it, a sudden, sharp rap echoed from downstairs, making him jump. It sounded like someone knocking on the front door. He froze, his mind racing. Who would be calling at this hour, in this desolate place? He was sure Thomas had been the last person he'd seen. The whispers from the nursery instantly ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence that was almost more terrifying than the sounds. Elias hesitated, caught between the unsettling silence of the nursery and the unexpected summons from downstairs. The cold grip of the house seemed to tighten around him, and he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that his quiet refuge had just become something far more sinister. If you're eager to uncover the chilling secrets of Willow Creek and follow Elias's terrifying journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next in this haunting tale. This is a fictional story. Elias descended the grand staircase, his heart a drumbeat in the oppressive silence. The rap on the door had been a clear, undeniable sound, yet now there was nothing but the echoing stillness of the old house. He reached the bottom, his hand instinctively going to the heavy brass knob of the front door. He pulled it open slowly, revealing not a visitor, but only the inky blackness of the night and the skeletal silhouettes of the surrounding trees. The wind, which had been whipping fiercely moments before, had died down to a low, mournful sigh. There was no one there. A cold dread seeped into Elias's bones. He was a man of reason, a journalist who dealt in facts, but the events of the last few minutes defied all logical explanation. He stood on the porch for a moment, scanning the desolate landscape, the feeling of being watched prickling at the back of his neck. He quickly closed the door, the thud echoing through the empty house. He returned to the entrance hall, the flickering lamplight casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his composure. The whispers from the nursery, though absent now, had left an indelible mark on his mind. He tried to tell himself it was the wind, the creaks of an old house, perhaps even his own exhaustion playing tricks on him. But the rhythmic quality of the sound, the almost melodic cadence, lingered. Determined to dismiss the unsettling notions, Elias decided to thoroughly inspect the house, starting with the nursery. He ascended the stairs once more, his boots making soft thuds on the worn wood. As he neared the room, a faint, sweet smell, like dried roses and something else he couldn't quite place, wafted from under the door. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The nursery was a cavern of shadows, dust motes dancing in the slender shafts of moonlight that pierced the grimy windows. A small, intricately carved wooden rocking horse stood in the center, its painted eyes seeming to stare blankly ahead. A faded floral wallpaper depicting frolicking lambs peeled in places, revealing the darker plaster beneath. In one corner, a small, dust-shrouded crib stood silent, its delicate lace canopy ripped and tattered. Elias walked deeper into the room, his lantern held high. He ran a gloved hand over the rocking horse, feeling the smooth, cold wood. There was an unnerving sense of presence in the room, as if time had stopped abruptly the moment the twins had vanished. He knelt beside the crib, examining the yellowed sheets. There were faint indentations, as if small heads had once rested there, and a thin layer of dust lay over everything. He found no evidence of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, just an eerie stillness. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the room again. His eyes landed on a small, hidden panel in the wall, half concealed by a peeling section of wallpaper. Curiosity overcoming his lingering unease, he pressed against it. It clicked open with a soft sigh, revealing a narrow, dark space within the wall. He aimed his lantern inside, the beam cutting through the gloom. Inside the small cavity, nestled amongst cobwebs, lay a single worn rag doll. Its button eyes stared up at him, and its faded dress was stained with what looked like dried mud. But what caught his attention was not the doll itself, but a small, intricately folded piece of parchment clutched in its threadbare hand. With trembling fingers, Elias carefully extracted the note. He unfolded it, the brittle paper crackling softly. The handwriting was childish, yet clear, written in a faded ink that seemed to have bled slightly over time. "They're taking us. We hear them too. Mama said they're just a phase, but they whisper our names." Elias read the words again, a cold wave washing over him. "They're taking us." The phrase echoed in his mind, chilling him to the bone. This wasn't some childish game. This was a plea, a desperate message left by a terrified child. And the last line, "Mama said they're just a phase, but they whisper our names," resonated with what Thomas, the carriage driver, had said. The family's dismissive attitude now seemed sinister, a deliberate blindness to something truly horrific. He pocketed the note, his journalist's instincts kicking in. This was no mere local legend. This was a mystery, a dark secret buried within the walls of this house. The whispers he'd heard, the uncanny silence that followed them, they weren't mere figments of his imagination. He had dismissed them as the creaks and groans of an old house, but the note proved otherwise. As he turned to leave the nursery, a sudden sharp draft swept through the room, even though the windows were closed. The rag doll, which he had placed gently back into the wall cavity, now lay on the floor, its button eyes seeming to watch him. He stared at it, a shiver running down his spine. Had he really placed it back in the wall? He was sure he had. A floorboard creaked loudly behind him in the hallway. Elias spun around, his lantern held high. Nothing. The hallway was empty, shrouded in shadows. He told himself it was the house settling, a natural occurrence in such an old structure. Yet the distinct feeling of being observed persisted, a cold weight on his shoulders. He spent the rest of the night on the main floor, huddled by the grand fireplace, trying to light a fire with the damp wood he found. The wind howled outside, a mournful lament, and every creak and groan of the house seemed to be amplified, taking on a sinister quality. He tried to read the newspaper he'd brought, but his mind kept replaying the words on the note, the image of the rag doll, and the faint, unsettling whispers. Sleep was an impossible luxury. He felt a desperate need to unravel the truth of the Blackwood twins, a feeling that went beyond professional curiosity. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't alone in this house. The whispers, whether real or imagined, were a symptom of a deeper, darker secret, one that clung to Willow Creek like the persistent autumn fog. The mystery of the Blackwood twins, once a forgotten local tale, had now become undeniably personal. The first rays of dawn pierced through the grimy windows of the Blackwood mansion, painting the dust-filled air with streaks of pale gold. Elias, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep, watched the sun rise, a cold cup of coffee clutched in his hand. The night had been long and unsettling, filled with phantom whispers and the constant creaking of the old house. The note from the nursery, now tucked securely in his breast pocket, felt like a burning coal against his skin. It was undeniable proof that something profoundly disturbing had occurred within these walls. He decided his next step was to visit the town. Willow Creek, despite its idyllic name, had an air of brooding quietness, a palpable tension beneath its calm exterior. He needed to speak to the locals, to unearth the hidden truths that lay buried beneath years of silence and dismissive rumors. As he walked down the winding dirt road towards the town, the morning air was crisp and invigorating, a stark contrast to the stagnant atmosphere of the mansion. The town itself was small, a collection of weathered wooden buildings clustered around a central square. A general store, a blacksmith, a church, and a handful of houses made up its entirety. There were few people out, and those he saw averted their gaze or offered quick, terse greetings. It was clear he was an outsider, and his arrival seemed to stir a quiet apprehension among the townsfolk. His first stop was the general store, a dusty establishment that smelled of dried herbs and aging leather. The proprietor, a stout woman with keen, suspicious eyes, watched him as he browsed the meager shelves. "Morning, ma'am," Elias offered, attempting a friendly demeanor. "I'm Elias Thorne, recently inherited the Blackwood place." The woman's lips thinned. "Heard you arrived last night." "Martha Gable," she replied, her voice gruff. "That house? It's a lot of work." "Indeed," Elias agreed, trying to steer the conversation. "I was told the house has been empty for some time, since the Blackwood family left." He paused, carefully watching her reaction. "Something about their twins, Mary and Martha, disappearing?" Martha Gable stiffened. Her hands, which had been tidying a display of canned goods, stilled. Her gaze flickered to the dusty window, then back to Elias, a shadow of fear in her eyes. "Folks don't talk about that much, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It was a long time ago. A tragedy, plain and simple. The family, they just moved on." "Moved on?" Elias pressed, feigning a casual tone. "But children don't just vanish. Was there no investigation? No search?" Martha wrung her hands. "The sheriff, bless his soul, did what he could. Searched the woods, the creek. Nothing. The Blackwoods, they were private folk, kept to themselves. Said the girls were troubled, had vivid imaginations, always talking about things others couldn't see." She leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "They said it was just a phase, that the girls would get over it, that they probably ran off." "Ran off?" Elias repeated, incredulous. 7-year-old twins? He thought of the note, the desperate plea, the whispers. This narrative of a phase felt like a meticulously crafted lie, a collective delusion the town had embraced. "It's what the family insisted," Martha said, her eyes pleading with him to drop the subject. "And folks here, yeah, we believed them. It was easier to believe that than anything else." Her gaze drifted towards the back of the store, and Elias followed it to a shadowed doorway. He sensed she was holding back, a common thread he was beginning to notice in Willow Creek. He purchased a few provisions, and as he left, he saw an elderly man sitting on a bench outside, whittling a piece of wood. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes ancient and knowing. Elias approached him. "Excuse me, sir," Elias began. "I'm Elias Thorne, the new owner of the Blackwood place." The old man, Silas, looked up, his movements slow and deliberate. "Silas, heard you were coming. Another one to stir up old ghosts, eh?" His voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Ghosts?" Elias tried to keep his voice light. "Just trying to understand the history of the house. I heard about the Blackwood twins." Silas snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Mary and Martha, sweet girls. Too sweet for this place, maybe. Their mama, Eleanor Blackwood, she was a quiet woman, always looked tired. And their father, Jeremiah, he was a stern man. Didn't tolerate foolishness, especially not from his girls." "And what was this foolishness?" Elias asked, sensing he was getting closer to something. Silas stopped whittling, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond Elias's shoulder. "They talked about friends, invisible friends. Said they played with them in the walls, in the darkness. Jeremiah would lash out. Tell 'em to stop their nonsense. Eleanor, she just sighed, said it was a phase, always a phase. But those girls, they clung to their stories, said the whispers were getting louder. A chill ran down Elias's spine. The whispers, the note, it was all beginning to fit. So, the family truly believed it was a phase? Silas chuckled, a hollow sound. They wanted to believe it, Mr. Thorne. It was easier than facing what they couldn't understand, or what they refused to understand. This town, it agreed. It was a silent agreement. We looked the other way. We always do. Look the other way from what? Elias pressed, his voice barely a whisper. Silas finally met Elias's gaze, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. From the things that walk between the shadows, Mr. Thorne, the things that whisper when no one is listening, and sometimes the things that take. He then went back to his whittling, clearly having said all he intended. Elias left Silas, a profound sense of unease settling over him. The dismissive phrase, just a phase, was more than just a family's denial. It was a town's complicity, a collective turning of a blind eye to a horrifying reality. The whispers he heard, the note he found, they were not just echoes of the past, but a chilling reminder of a present danger, one that the town, through its silence, had allowed to fester. He knew now that his investigation would not just be about uncovering a past tragedy, but about confronting a darkness that still clung to Willow Creek, a darkness that had been nurtured by the very people who claimed to be safe from it. The Blackwood house was merely the focal point, the eye of a silent storm that had never truly passed. Back at the Blackwood mansion, the weight of Silas's words hung heavy in the air, transforming the silence of the house from eerie to menacing. Elias re-entered. The faint scent of dust and something vaguely sweet, the same smell he'd noticed in the nursery, immediately assaulting his senses. The town's collective denial, their silent agreement, painted a disturbing picture. It suggested that whatever befell the twins was not merely a family secret, but a truth Willow Creek had actively suppressed. He returned to the nursery, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The rag doll was still on the floor where he'd last seen it, its button eyes seeming to follow him. He picked it up, noting the crude stitching and the unusual heaviness of it for its size. He ran his fingers over the faded dress, feeling the coarse fabric. There was nothing overtly sinister about it, yet it emanated an unsettling aura. Elias placed the doll on a small, rickety table near the window, then began a meticulous search of the room. He ran his hands along the peeling wallpaper, tapped on the walls, and even checked the floorboards. The note had implied the twins heard them, and that they were taking us. This suggested a physical presence, not just disembodied voices. He needed to find out where these whispers originated. He was examining a particularly loose floorboard near the crib when he heard it again. A faint, rhythmic scraping, like something being dragged across a rough surface. It wasn't coming from the walls this time, but from directly beneath him. His breath hitched in his throat. The house had a cellar, he recalled from his aunt's ambiguous letters, a damp, dark space used for storage. The scraping sound intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. It was too deep, too resonant to be a child's voice. It sounded ancient, predatory. Elias's journalistic skepticism warred with a primal fear. He tried to rationalize it. A rat, perhaps, or the settling of the house. But the distinct rhythmic nature of the sound defied such explanations. He quickly exited the nursery, his heart pounding. The cellar entrance, he remembered, was a heavy wooden trapdoor located in the kitchen. He descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet house. The kitchen was a dimly lit, cavernous space, filled with antiquated cooking implements and a pervasive smell of decay. In the corner, almost hidden by a stack of old crates, he found it. A square of darker wood on the floor, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding planks. The scraping sound was louder here, undeniably emanating from beneath the trapdoor. It was accompanied now by a series of faint thuds, as if something heavy was being moved around. Elias knelt, his ear pressed against the cold wood. He could discern the low murmuring more clearly, a strange, almost musical cadence that sent a cold shiver down his spine. It wasn't words he could understand, but a series of elongated, sibilant sounds that felt profoundly alien and unsettling. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the iron ring embedded in the trapdoor. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to flee this cursed place and never look back. But the image of the note, the desperate plea of the vanished twins, held him rooted to the spot. He had to know. He had to uncover the truth. With a deep breath, Elias grasped the ring and pulled. The trapdoor groaned, a protesting sound that echoed through the silent house, and then slowly lifted, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. A cold, damp air, thick with the smell of earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood, wafted up from the depths. His lantern, held aloft, cast a meager light into the abyss. The cellar was vast and uneven, with a dirt floor and low, crumbling stone walls. Piles of forgotten furniture lay shrouded under decades of dust, looking like slumbering monsters. But what immediately caught Elias's eye was not the clutter, but a set of fresh drag marks in the damp earth, leading from one corner of the cellar towards a darker, more obscured section. He slowly descended the creaking wooden steps, his senses on high alert. The scraping sound had ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing filled the void. He followed the drag marks, his lantern beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. As he neared the far corner, the metallic, sweet smell grew stronger, almost overwhelming. His light fell upon a disturbing sight. Strewn across the dirt floor were several crude wooden toys, a miniature rocking horse, similar to the one in the nursery, a small chipped porcelain doll, and a handful of faded wooden blocks. They looked like children's toys, but they were coated in a thick layer of grime, and some were broken, splintered as if by force. Then he saw it. Partially obscured by a large, overturned wooden barrel, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. Elias picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was intricately engraved with the initials M.B., Mary Blackwood. The locket was open, and inside, two miniature hand-painted portraits stared up at him, two young girls, identical in every detail, with wide, innocent eyes. The Blackwood twins. A low, guttural growl echoed from the deepest shadows of the cellar, startling Elias. It wasn't human. It was a sound of primal hunger, of something ancient and malevolent stirring in the darkness. His lantern flickered, threatening to extinguish, plunging him into total blackness. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost tangible sense of oppressive malevolence. He felt a profound, chilling realization. Whatever had taken the twins, whatever had been whispering their names, was not gone. It was still here. It was beneath him, and it was waiting. If you're gripped by the mystery of Willow Creek and want to uncover the dark secrets that lie beneath the Blackwood mansion, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter. This is a fictional story. The growl reverberated through the cavernous cellar, a sound that bypassed Elias's ears and vibrated directly in his bones. His lantern flickered precariously, casting grotesque, shifting shadows that seemed to morph into monstrous shapes on the crumbling stone walls. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, to scramble back up the steps and slam the trapdoor shut. But the locket still clutched in his trembling hand, felt like a silent plea from the vanished twins, anchoring him to the terrifying reality of the moment. He swung the lantern wildly, trying to pierce the oppressive gloom that clung to the far corners of the cellar. The growl was followed by a series of soft, scuttling sounds, like something large moving quickly over the dirt floor. Elias's gaze darted frantically, trying to pinpoint the source. The air grew impossibly colder, carrying that metallic sweet scent that now made his stomach churn. Suddenly, a faint glint of light caught his eye, barely visible in the deepest shadows. It was a sliver of luminescence, not from his lantern, but from something deeper within the earth. He took a hesitant step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scuttling sounds seemed to recede, as if whatever was making them was moving away, deeper into the darkness. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Elias pushed past the overturned barrel and the scattered toys, his light beam cutting through the thick dust. The glint of light intensified, revealing not a crack in the wall, but a narrow, almost invisible opening, cleverly disguised by loose stones and overgrown roots. It was a hidden passageway, a secret entrance into something unknown. He squeezed through the tight opening, the rough stone scraping against his coat. The passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and the air within was even colder, heavy and still, as if no fresh air had touched it in decades. He had to hunch over, his lantern held high, illuminating a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. The floor was damp earth, slick with moisture, and the walls were rough-hewn stone, crudely cut, not appearing to be part of the house's original foundation. The tunnel sloped downwards, deeper and deeper into the darkness. Elias's sense of claustrophobia warred with his insatiable curiosity. He could hear no more growls or scuttling sounds, only the frantic beating of his own heart and the ragged sound of his breathing. The silence here was different from the silence of the house. It was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on him. He walked for what felt like an eternity, the passage twisting and turning. The temperature continued to drop, and the metallic, sweet smell became almost overpowering, making him gag. Then the tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. The air in the chamber was stagnant, thick with the scent of decay. Elias's lantern beam swept across the rough-hewn walls, revealing crude carvings etched into the stone. They were simple, almost childlike drawings, depicting stick figures. But the figures were disturbing. Small, elongated shapes with overly large heads and long, spindly limbs. Some appeared to be dragging other, smaller figures. Elias's blood ran cold. These weren't mere doodles. They were depictions, perhaps, of what had taken the twins. In the center of the chamber stood a shallow, excavated pit, disturbingly similar in shape to a small, open grave. And within it, scattered haphazardly, were more children's toys. A wooden train, a porcelain doll with one eye missing, a collection of marbles, and amidst them, a small, faded blue ribbon, the kind worn in a girl's hair. He remembered seeing a similar ribbon in an old portrait of the Blackwood twins, a copy of which his aunt had surprisingly possessed. But it was what was not in the pit that truly chilled Elias to his core. There were no human remains, no bones, no clothing, nothing to suggest that this pit was a burial site. It was as if the children had simply vanished. As Elias stood there, a profound sense of despair washing over him, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the chamber. It started as a faint vibration, then grew a resonant thrumming that seemed to come from the very earth itself. It was the same unsettling sound he'd heard in the cellar, just before the growl. And then, the whispers returned. This time, they were clearer, closer. Not just two voices, but many. An undulating chorus of sibilant sounds that seemed to coil around him. They were not words, but they conveyed a distinct sense of urgency, of malice. The light from his lantern flickered violently, dancing on the macabre carvings, making the stick figures appear to writhe. He felt a sudden, icy touch on his ankle, like a cold, slender hand grasping him. Elias yelped, stumbling back, almost dropping his lantern. He swung the light down, revealing nothing but the damp earth floor. Yet the sensation lingered, a phantom coldness that made his skin crawl. A whisper, closer than the others, seemed to coil around his ear, distinct from the cacophony. It was a single, elongated sound, like a drawn-out sigh, yet it carried an undeniable quality of malevolent amusement. It was as if something was mocking him, playing with him. Elias's breath hitched. He knew then, with a terrifying certainty, that he was not merely investigating a cold case. He had stumbled into something far more ancient and sinister than he could have ever imagined. The twins weren't just missing, they had been taken, and whatever had taken them was still here, lurking in the shadows, its presence an insidious cold that permeated the very fabric of this forgotten place. The phase was a lie, a flimsy veil over a horrifying truth, and he, Elias Thorne, had unwittingly pulled it back. The question wasn't just what had happened to the twins, but what was still happening, and how many other children had vanished into the silent, whispering depths of Willow Creek. He gripped the locket tightly, a silent vow passing his lips. He would find out. Elias scrambled backward, his heart pounding. The icy touch on his ankle and the mocking whisper were chillingly real. He had disturbed something ancient, something that had claimed the Blackwood twins. The chamber air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something akin to a charnel house. He raised his trembling lantern, its beam revealing crude carvings on the walls and the unsettling pit of scattered toys. A dizzying pressure built in his head as the chorus of sibilant whispers swelled, clawing at his sanity. Elias forced himself to breathe, a journalist determined to find a rational explanation, however terrifying. He backed towards the hidden passage, eyes scanning the chamber for the source of the whispers, which seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The lantern light appeared to be consumed by the shadows, making the corners impossibly dark. As he reached the narrow opening, he heard a faint, rhythmic clicking like insects coming from the shadows opposite him. He swung his lantern towards the sound. For a fleeting moment he saw them, 2 points of pale, luminous light, low to the ground. They pulsated, drawing light from his lantern, then vanished, leaving only the chilling echo of the clicking. Elias stumbled back through the narrow passage, desperate to escape. He crawled on hands and knees, the cold, damp earth clinging to him. The whispers followed, growing fainter but never truly vanishing. He still felt the phantom touch on his ankle, the icy tendrils of fear coiling in his gut. He burst back into the cellar, gasping for breath, and slammed the trapdoor shut. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the sounds he'd just escaped. He leaned against the trapdoor, trembling, his mind reeling. He tried to compose himself. This wasn't a ghost. The presence, the whispers, the tangible cold, the luminous eyes, they were too real to dismiss. He spent the rest of the day in the kitchen trying to make sense of his discoveries. The locket with the twins' innocent faces stared up at him. The just a phase narrative now felt like a desperate, deliberate obfuscation. As dusk settled, Elias remembered his aunt's mention of a collector of echoes that fed on forgotten whispers. This chilling notion gave new meaning to the whispers and the twins' notes. Perhaps they were a lure. He realized he needed more information beyond Willow Creek's silent agreement, specifically about the Blackwood family's history before and after Willow Creek. Such records would be difficult to obtain, but he knew it was the only way to understand the entity beneath the mansion. As night fell, Elias made a decision. He wouldn't leave. The mystery of the Blackwood twins and the terrifying entity was too significant. He would stay, investigate, and unearth the truth. The whispers were growing stronger, calling to him, and he was now irrevocably entangled in the Blackwood legacy. The hunt for answers had just begun, and the collector of whispers was waiting. The next morning, Elias woke with renewed purpose, despite exhaustion and the cellar's phantom chill. The terrifying events had solidified his resolve. The Blackwood twins were victims of a horrific force the town ignored. He had to dig deeper. He began searching the master bedroom for any Blackwood family effects, letters, journals, anything to shed light on their lives before the tragedy. The room felt heavy with sorrow. He systematically searched wardrobes and chests, finding only old clothes and faded linens. The family seemed to have purged the house of personal items, especially those related to the girls. Just as he was about to give up, his hand brushed a loose panel at the back of an armoire. It clicked open, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside, nestled beneath yellowed lace, was a large leather-bound family photo album. Elias carefully opened it. The first pages showed stern ancestors, then informal family gatherings. Then he saw them, Mary and Martha. They appeared in several photos from infants to 7-year-olds, identical and mischievous. One photo showed them by the rocking horse from the nursery. Another, in the garden, with a small faded blue ribbon in Mary's hair, the same ribbon he'd found in the hidden chamber. As he turned the pages, a disturbing pattern emerged. Early photos showed vibrant twins, but later ones depicted a haunted, fearful look in their eyes. Their smiles seemed forced, their bodies stiff. In the last few photos before their disappearance, they subtly looked away from the camera, towards the edges of the frame, as if observing something unseen. Elias felt a cold knot tighten. Other family members in the photos also avoided looking at the twins, reinforcing Silas's words about the silent agreement. This suggested the Blackwood family wasn't just in denial, they were actively ignoring whatever affected their children. On the very last page was a disturbing close-up of the twins indoors. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with profound terror. Mary pressed a hand to her ear. Martha clutched the rag doll Elias had found. In the background, barely visible, was a faint, shimmering distortion, like ripples on water, similar to the air in the hidden chamber. Below the photo, a faded inscription in a delicate hand read, "They whisper, Mama. They hear us now." This was Eleanor Blackwood's handwriting. She had known. She hadn't dismissed it as a phase. She had seen or heard something terrifying but remained silent. Her inaction, her complicity, appalled Elias. Why would a mother allow such suffering? As he stared at the photo, lantern light casting long shadows, he heard it again. A faint whisper from the room's corner. It was the same sibilant sound, but now a single elongated sigh, laden with malevolent amusement, the same sound he'd heard when touched in the hidden chamber. Elias dropped the album. His gaze snapped to the corner. The shadows deepened, coiling as if something immense stirred within them. The air grew impossibly cold, filled with a sickeningly sweet, metallic scent, stronger than ever. He backed away, hand instinctively reaching for the iron poker. His heart hammered. He was no longer just an investigator. He was now part of the Blackwood legacy. The whispers were no longer echoes, they were a presence, a living entity that had taken the twins, been mocked by its family, and now turned its malevolent attention to him. He knew, with chilling certainty, he wasn't alone. And whatever it was no longer just whispering. It was watching. The malevolent whisper froze Elias in his tracks. The master bedroom's darkness deepened, absorbing the meager lantern light. He gripped the iron poker, his knuckles white as the air grew colder and the metallic sweet scent intensified. An oppressive dread pressed down on him. Slowly, Elias turned to the large, ornate mirror draped with a dusty cloth. A morbid curiosity compelled him to pull the cloth away. The mirror's tarnished surface reflected his terrified face. Then, a subtle distortion appeared at the edges of his reflection, a faint shimmer, like the one in the twins' last photograph. As he watched, mesmerized, it grew, twisting his image. From the deepening shadows within, 2 points of pale, luminous light materialized, the same eyes he'd glimpsed in the hidden chamber. They pulsed, drawing light, emanating an ancient predatory intelligence. Frozen, Elias couldn't scream. The whispers in the room intensified, a guttural, sibilant sound that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the same hum from the hidden chamber, now loud enough to ache his teeth. Behind his reflection, a shadow began to emerge, a deeper, living darkness, formless, writhing within the mirror. It had no features, yet its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. The luminous eyes bored into his soul, plumbing his fear. He felt a searing coldness spread from his chest. A chilling thought echoed in his mind. You hear them, don't you? The little ones. They called to you. And now, you will call to us. Elias stumbled back, breaking the terrifying trance. He squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them to see the mirror as just tarnished glass, reflecting only his terrified face. The shadows receded, the whispers faded. But the experience left an indelible mark. He now understood the horror. Not a ghost, but an ancient, insidious, parasitic entity that preyed on fear and isolation. A collector of whispers and a taker. It manipulated perception, fed on children, and had claimed the Blackwood twins, their messages now a lure for its next victim. He retreated from the master bedroom, trembling. He couldn't stay in the house. He needed a safe place to think, strategize, and fight this evil. His thoughts turned to Willow Creek, to the town that had silently agreed to this horror. They knew. Some had to know more than they let on. He stumbled down the stairs, adrenaline coursing through him. He grabbed his coat and satchel, stuffing in the family album and the nursery note. He needed to find out who in Willow Creek knew the most, who had seen something they couldn't explain but chose to suppress. There had to be an outlier. As he reached the front door, rain began to fall. The wind howled, and the house seemed to breathe around him, a malevolent entity. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the dark, rain-swept night, desperate to escape the collector's immediate presence. He left the Blackwood mansion behind, its dark windows staring after him, the whispers trailing him into the night. His fight for the truth had escalated into a fight for survival. The sheriff's warning. It knows when it's being watched. It wants you to be afraid. It will come for you. Chilled Elias, but also ignited a new resolve. He was no longer just investigating. He was fighting for Willow Creek, for the forgotten children, and for his own survival. He stumbled through the chilling rain, the Blackwood mansion looming behind him. His only instinct was to put distance between himself and the terrifying entity. The downpour intensified, turning the dirt road into a muddy quagmire. His feet, almost on their own, carried him towards Willow Creek's faint lights. He needed answers, perhaps from Silas, who had hinted at hidden knowledge. He arrived in town, soaked and shivering. He found Sheriff Brody's office, a small, dimly lit wooden building. Elias pounded on the door. Brody opened it, his expression stern. "Mr. Thorne," Brody said flatly, eyeing Elias's drenched state, "what brings you out on a night like this?" "Sheriff," Elias began hoarsely, "I need to talk to you about the Blackwood twins, Mary and Martha." Brody's expression hardened. "Again, with the old stories, Mr. Thorne? That was a long time ago. A closed case." He started to close the door. "It's not closed," Elias insisted, forcing his way inside. "I found things. A note from Mary confirming they were taken, and something in the cellar. Something unnatural." He held out the tattered note. "They weren't just a phase, Sheriff. They were taken by something." Brody stared at the note but didn't take it. "Mr. Thorne," he said, voice low and warning. There are things in this town best left undisturbed. The Blackwood family. They insisted the girls ran off. We searched. We found nothing. It was a tragedy, plain and simple. Simple, Elias scoffed. I found a hidden chamber, Sheriff. Carvings, toys, and something else. Something that growls, makes the air cold, whispers and feeds on fear. This isn't a simple disappearance, and you know it. Brody stepped back, hand drifting to his pistol. Mr. Thorne, you're exhausted. That house is playing tricks on your mind. Perhaps you should consider leaving Willow Creek. Leaving? Elias's voice rose. And let this thing continue to prey on this town. Is that what you did with the twins? Did you just look the other way? A muscle twitched in Brody's jaw. I did my duty. The Blackwoods were respected. Their word carried weight. Sometimes there are things we can't explain. Things we can't fight. It's safer to just accept. Accept that children are being taken by unseen horror. Elias echoed, incredulous. What kind of sheriff, what kind of town accepts that? Brody sighed, a weary sound. He pulled a faded folder from a cabinet. Here, he said, laying it on his desk. The Blackwood case files. Nothing. No leads. The parents insisted. He looked at Elias. But I'll tell you this. There were other whispers in this town, other children, always dismissed as runaways or imagination, always just a phase. Other children? Elias whispered, the scope of the horror widening. Brody nodded. My own sister, when she was a girl, said she heard voices in the woods. My parents called it imagination, a phase. But she changed. Never quite the same. He looked at Elias with deep pain. This town, it has a long memory for silence. We've learned to be quiet about certain things. It's how we survive. Survive what? Elias demanded. Tell me, Sheriff. What is this thing? Brody closed his eyes. I don't know, Mr. Thorne, but it's old, older than this town. It feeds on fear, on isolation. It lures children with whispers, makes them think it's a friend. Then, it takes them, and the families, the town. We pretend it's a phase, because the alternative is madness. He looked at Elias with a direct, warning gaze. You're getting too close. That thing, it knows when it's being watched. It's watching you now. It wants you to be afraid, isolated. If you keep digging, stirring the silence, it will come for you. Just like it came for the others. The words hung heavy, a chilling premonition. Elias realized the sheriff wasn't just dismissive. He was terrified. He was trying to warn him, but Elias couldn't turn away now. He had seen the shadow, heard the whispers, read the twins' plea. He knew the truth. The sheriff's silence, and the town's, was about preservation, about ensuring their fragile existence in the face of evil. But Elias knew he could not allow this silence to continue. He had to expose it, break the cycle of fear and denial, even if it meant confronting the collector directly. The sheriff's warning, it knows when it's being watched. It wants you to be afraid. It will come for you, fueled Elias's resolve. He was no longer just investigating. He was fighting for Willow Creek, for the forgotten children, and for his own survival. He couldn't stay at the sheriff's office or return to the mansion. He needed a plan and a sanctuary. His thoughts turned to Silas, who had hinted at knowledge. He found Silas on his porch, staring into the rain. Silas, I need your help. The sheriff. He confirmed it. Other children. This thing is still here. Silas turned his ancient eyes to Elias, a profound sadness on his face. I told you, Mr. Thorne, some things are best left alone, but I knew you wouldn't listen. Your eyes, they hold a light too bright for this place. What do you know? Elias pleaded. About this collector, how do we fight it? Silas sighed. It preys on the vulnerable, the isolated. It feeds on fear, on quiet despair. It pulls them into the spaces between things where light cannot reach. The Blackwood twins. They were sensitive. Their parents tried to deny it, but denial only made them more vulnerable. But how do we stop it? Elias pressed, a flicker of hope. Silas slowly rose, gazing at the distant Blackwood mansion. It hates light. Not just physical light, but the light of truth, of acknowledgement. It thrives in silence, in the shadows of denial. The Blackwoods, the town, they fed it with their silence. So we expose it? Elias asked. We bring it into the light. Not with a lamp, Mr. Thorne, Silas said, shaking his head. With noise, with truth, with witness. It needs to be seen, to be acknowledged. And that house, it's the heart of its domain. Elias realized they had to confront it, not with weapons, but with truth. He spent the rest of the night with Silas, learning about the entity's subtle signs and how it manipulated thoughts, planting doubt and fear, making families dismiss their children's cries. The truth was a horrifying tapestry of decades of fear and complicity. As dawn approached, a reckless, dangerous plan formed. He would return to the Blackwood mansion, not to investigate, but to expose. He would use his journalistic skills to broadcast the truth to the entity that fed on silence. He returned at first light, bringing an old gramophone and blank wax cylinders from the Blackwood shed. His plan was simple: record the whispers and sounds of the entity, then play them back, amplified throughout the house. He would turn its own lure against it. He set up the gramophone in the grand entrance hall. As he began to speak into the recording horn, his voice trembling, he heard them, the whispers growing louder, coiling around him. The rhythmic scraping, the clicking, a low, guttural growl resonated through the house. The air grew cold, heavy with the metallic, sweet scent. "I know what you are," Elias yelled into the horn, voice cracking. "You feed on fear, you thrive in silence, but no more. The truth will expose you." He turned on the recording. The stylus dropped, and the gramophone began to record his narration. The hidden chamber, the toys, the family album, the twins' desperate note, the sheriff's confession, Silas's knowledge, the town's denial, the phase that was a deliberate cover-up. He spoke of Mary and Martha Blackwood, their names echoing. As he spoke, the whispers intensified, a furious chorus trying to drown him out. The house groaned and shuddered, objects rattled, pictures swung, chandeliers swayed. The shadow in the mirror pulsed with rage. Luminous eyes appeared in the darkened corners, filled with primal hatred. He stopped speaking, rewound the cylinder, his hands shaking. He looked at the whispering darkness, the malevolent eyes. "You want whispers?" he yelled. "You want echoes? Then hear your own truth." He started the gramophone. The needle scraped across the wax and then amplified, distorted, horrifyingly clear. Elias's own voice boomed through the house, detailing the entity's history, methods, and victims. And then the whispers themselves played back, loud and clear, the sibilant ancient sounds that had haunted the house for decades. Then the raw, terrifying, guttural growl. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The house shook violently. The amplified whispers seemed to recoil. The luminous eyes flickered and dimmed. The metallic, sweet scent intensified, then dissipated, replaced by a putrid, burning smell. A piercing shriek, unlike anything Elias had ever heard, tore through the air, a sound of pure agony. The shadows in the hall writhed, then contracted, dissolving into nothingness. The house ceased its shuddering, settling into an unnatural, almost deafening silence. The coldness receded, leaving only a lingering chill. Elias stood, gasping for breath, clutching the gramophone. The whispers, growls, and luminous eyes were gone. The oppressive presence had lifted. He played the recording one last time, listening to his own voice, to the entity's now muted, powerless echoes. He knew it wasn't destroyed, only driven back. But for now, Willow Creek was free. The silence was broken. The truth had been spoken. The collector of whispers exposed. He took the gramophone and the cylinder, his mission accomplished. He would leave Willow Creek, but he would carry the story, writing it not just for a newspaper, but for the world. A testament to horrors thriving in silence and truth's power to push back darkness. As he walked out of the Blackwood mansion for the last time, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light on the old house. The windows, once vacant and knowing, now held only reflections of the dawn. The Blackwood twins and the other lost children would finally have their story told.